And Julia Gillard yesterday drew one clear distinction between herself and Kevin Rudd. She doesn't believe in a big Australia. She prefers a sustainable Australia. The Minister for Sustainable Population, Tony Burke, is our program guest this morning. But before he joins us, with the help of the panel, we'll check out the Sunday papers around the country. And the News Limited papers, all of them, feature the first poll of the election campaign. Dennis Atkins, take us through the details.
Yes, the first Galaxy poll shows us that the vote hasn't changed, basically, in the last few weeks. The Labor Party and the Coalition are on the same primary vote of 39 for Labor, 42 for the Coalition. This translates, assuming a preference flow that occurred in 2007 will occur this year, this translates into 52-48, a lead for Labor. The poll also shows us that Julia Gillard is trouncing Tony Abbott as preferred Prime Minister, 58-32. There's also strong support for an early election, so I think the public wanted the election to be brought on as much as Julia Gillard did. One of the really interesting questions that Galaxy have asked is who deserves to win, and the poll shows that neither side has a majority of Australians thinking they deserve to win. 52% say that Labor doesn't deserve to win, 62% says that the Coalition doesn't deserve to win. Now, my betting is that if Kevin Rudd had remained leader, that Labor figure would have been much higher. These are key figures, and these are figures to watch during the campaign. You've got a contest where neither side is terribly popular. Both sides have got their problems, and I think it's going to be who deserves to win the most, even though it might be under 50%. That might end up being the side that wins.
So, Lenore, early days, but do you think that's some vindication for the leadership change?
Well, I think Labor clearly feels vindicated. They got a bounce in the polls. It achieved what they wanted it to achieve almost immediately, and it continues to achieve that, which is moving forward in the polls. And
Michael Stuchby, they asked one other key question.
Yes, and the Brisbane Sunday Mail calls it Rudd axing haunts Julia, and it's the poll that Dennis referred to, the Galaxy poll, which showed that 57% of Australians agree that Rudd's treatment will harm Labor's chances. That includes 62% of Queenslanders, given that Queensland's a battleground state, and Kevin Rudd, of course, being a Queenslander. And given the nature of this particular issue, 44% of Labor voters also agree that the treatment doled out to Kevin Rudd will harm Labor's chances. As Dennis says, a large number of people, 67% of people, also approve of Julia Gillard calling an early election, and of course that's what she and Labor are hoping, that calling the election now decisively will move the conversation onto other things.
Yeah, Dennis, as a Queenslander, explain this one to me, that before the leadership change, the polls were showing that Kevin Rudd was going to get wiped out in Queensland, and yet there's still that resentment there that he lost the leadership to Julia Gillard.
Yeah, this is something that's really surprised Labor, and I must admit it surprised me as well. Everybody expected that in Queensland there would be a negative reaction against cutting down a very popular somebody who was a very popular Queensland leader. But because of the fact that Labor was on the nose in Queensland, worse than anywhere else in the country, and seemingly the voters blame one person for all of the government's woes, and that was Kevin Rudd. They thought, well, this would be a sentiment that would show up but fade, but it hasn't faded. It's stayed quite strong, and that's one of the reasons why people inside the campaign have been arguing for an election to be brought on quickly, because they want to snap the voters out of that thinking.
He may be a bastard, but he's our bastard.
Well, and also this issue that Julia Gillard brought up from the very beginning, that she needs her own mandate, and she clearly knew from a very first press conference that was going to be an issue, that she hadn't been put there by the people, and that probably brought forward election timing as well.
And Lenore, it does seem as if the early days of the campaign at least is going to be dominated by immigration, population. Julia Gillard will be talking about that later on today.
She will. In her first big campaign speech in Brisbane, she's going to feel the pain of the voters in the big cities about overcrowding. She's going to feel their pain about struggling to find a seat on the bus or the train, feel their pain because they have to set their alarms earlier and earlier because peak hour doesn't just last for 1 hour anymore. These issues of overpopulation, overcrowding are clearly showing up in the party polling as being really intertwined with the immigration immigration issues, with the asylum issues, even though they're quite separate, and neither party is doing much to extricate them, to pull them apart, to try to treat them separately. They're going with the flow that we are overpopulated, that we need a sustainable population, and that this is somehow linked to the overall immigration intake, and even more surprisingly, to the very small asylum seeker intake.
She may be trying to do that. Well, so is Tony Abbott. We'll have a listen to what Tony Abbott said earlier this morning on Sky.
I think Australians want to feel like they are in charge of their destiny. I think Australians want to feel like we are running the country, and that's the problem with the boat people issue. We feel that we've become a soft touch. We feel that people are, in a sense, taking advantage of us, that the people smugglers and not the Australian government and ultimately the Australian people are in charge of the immigration program.
So there you go. The numbers are negligible, right, compared with the overall immigration, and yet both parties are comfortable with the idea that the asylum seekers are a big
Well, and
issue.
also if anybody arrives by boat, that number immediately comes off the other humanitarian program. So the overall numbers stay exactly the same as determined by the government of the day. But all those sorts of details fade, and both parties go with this argument.
But it's an absolutely ludicrous notion that a group of people sailing in a rickety boat across the Timor Sea are controlling the population policy of Australia. But instead of our political leaders, Julia Gillard and Tony Abbott, saying that's a ludicrous idea and here's why it's ludicrous, they say we feel your pain on this issue, we understand it and you're right to think that.